Okay, awesome. So to start off, if it's okay, I want to hear a little bit about Andy, if you don't mind sharing, like, were you searching for a mental skills coach? How did you get connected with Stu? And what was your process? Like, have you always worked on the mental side of your game, or is this kind of newer? If you can take us through that, like up to starting to work with Stu, that would be great.
Sure. So I feel like I have known the mental aspect of the game was super important, but I hadn't devoted a lot of time with it. And I had had exposures to talking to sports psychologists in college, starting off as a pro at the Spirit and a little bit with the national team, but it wasn't something that I consistently paid attention to. It was more, oh, when it was around, I'll use it. Or if I'm really, really, really struggling and need some kind of, um, I just knew that I was in the dumps, and that's not proactive and that's not preparing myself to be my best self. So I actually got connected to Stu through Aubrey. I obviously knew of him. Sorry, Aubrey Bledsoe, just to clarify, because she went on your live, I believe, Stu,
Sure.
and then you kind of passed it along, and she asked me if I'd be interested, and I said sure, because like we just said, like I'm pretty open. I think talking about it is super interesting. So I did my live with Stu, and that went great. And then I passed Stu along to my sister, Kaylee, who is a former collegiate athlete and a current collegiate coach. And I was watching her live, which was kind of fun for me. And then I had questions based on what they were talking about. And I felt really comfortable with Stu. And I just texted him like, hey, I had these questions. And I didn't think anything of it, because it's hard though. The questions regarding mental health and just sports psychology are not, there's no simple answers. Everything is so complex. So I was kind of expecting like a short, gist of a text. And he was like, no, let's talk about it. And talked to him about that. And it just, led to more discussion. And now it's something that I want to consistently pay attention to. And I'm already seeing and feeling, I would say, a difference, even just a short time of working with him consistently. But I also think it's not just talking to Stu consistently, which is great. It's just how much he's kind of hounded me, sounds bad, but just reminded me that the daily mindfulness is so important. So that I would say I'm still developing my mental game, but I'm really enjoying it. And I, wish I had devoted more of my attention to it earlier. I think it would have helped me a lot. But I am changing that now, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, I feel the same way you did. Like through my career, I went to a sports psychologist if I had a problem, but I
Right.
never attended to it. So Stu, I'm curious, when someone like Andy starts working with you versus maybe a youth player, like we're talking about a player who's at the top echelon in women's soccer. What's it like? How does your approach differ or what skills are more important, when you're talking to a professional player versus someone who's maybe starting out in their sports career?
It's funny. I would say that like at a fundamental level, it's not much different. It's like the brain's the brain, let's say. What I think is the most fascinating and like some of the like minor nuances is like, again, like you said, when you're talking to someone like Andy, who's like already at that like tip of the arrow, now it's like, look, 1%, 2% of growth translates. Whereas when you're talking to a like a youth athlete, there's a bigger gap. There's all sorts of skills that are still not yet formed and in place, like literally physical, or like their body's still maturing. Like there's so many variables that the mental is so important. It's a big part of it, but it's almost harder to know like what's the growth, what's going on. But when you talk, when you're working with pros, obviously that there's like 1%, 2% translates, and you can kind of feel it and see it. And I think that to me is the easiest difference. And then the other nuance is just simply that, whatever gets a pro to becoming a pro must have been good, right? Like at least in their mind, like, well, I'm pretty damn good. So like, you're going to tell me I don't know, like, and I make sure that I'm not trying to suggest that you're not already good. I'm trying to say this is maybe the last frontier of your development that is kind of untapped, and let's like really, and Andi is kindly, because I have been annoying, I'm sure, with her around, like, no, like, be consistent, be proactive, like, stop waiting, like, that doesn't make sense. Let's build this so that the next bad moment never hits, potentially, or if it does hit, it's like this rather than it's big. And I think that's, everybody needs to hear that, is the bottom line. Everybody needs to hear that.
For sure. And Andi, I'm curious to hear from you, if you don't mind sharing, like, where do you think if you were going to assess yourself on your mental skills, like, where do you feel like you're pretty strong versus what are some areas, like, what are your current areas of focus that you're working on with Stu, or what would you like to specifically get out of it?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. I don't know if it's something I think as a pro, you have a lot of practices evaluating your skills as a player, but evaluating your mental game is really weird. But I think this is actually something that was, when I was in my last camp, we kind of talked about as a group, is that there's always going to be something. So it's not, and Stu talks about this in his app with the mindfulness meditation, is like, it's not a skill that once you hit, you're good. Like, things are always going to be changing. There's going to be different stressors, more stressors, less stressors, things that you haven't faced, things that you have faced. So I think that, so in a way I'm like, oh, I understand that I understand it. So I'm in a good spot. But I think as things come up, and it's just going to fall, it's going to waver. And I think it's what Stu said, is that when things do happen, how much do they affect you, or how long do they affect you, and how quickly can you return to that neutral, let's say, is kind of the skill. So I mean, like, today's a good day, so I'm feeling good, but who knows what, tomorrow will be, or the next hour. So I think it's going well, but I think that's the funny thing. I've talked to Stu about this a couple of times. So I'll get in a really good habit of my mindfulness practice, just like 10 minutes every morning. And then I'll slack off for a few days. And I have had to, like, have my confession to him, like, oh, Stu, I've not been so good. And he's like, why? And in a way that's he's very, like, upfront about it, which I really appreciate. And it's cool because he has, like, no stake in the game. Sounds weird, but it's like, it's not a coach, it's not a parent, it's, not a friend. It's just like, well, you are, I would say, a friend too, but like, and it's just this different thing. And he's the way he put it to me was like, once you get fit, you don't stop training. Like, you maintain that fitness. And once he said that to me, it's just like such a snap realization. So, and it's just hits me over the head. So I've been better recently, Stu.
What is your mindfulness? Do you mind sharing what your your daily mindfulness practice is?
Yeah. When it's good, I wake up. Daily mindfulness. When it's good, I wake up, I make my coffee, I have a few sips, and I put some headphones on, and I have been using Stu's app, Dosu. Is that what it's called?
Do so.
Sorry. And I've been going through some of his lessons, I guess. And then sometimes if I've gone through kind of all of them, in between going through all of them, I'll just put on a timer for 10 minutes. And sometimes it maybe has background noise, and I'll just breathe. That's pretty much it. And it sounds really simple and, like, lame, and how could that be effective? But it is. And there's some days where it feels like I get super calm and I feel really relaxed, or I feel like in this mindfulness cloud. And then there are other days where I don't feel that way, and I just feel like my thoughts are still racing. I'm still thinking about what I have to do, after I'm done with my mindfulness and my coffee, but it's still so valuable no matter what. And I think it's been cool to realize how much it translates to training, or relates to training. Is like, some days you have a great day of training, and some days you have a shocker, and that is life. And so I think it's just been really cool to see those parallels and use them together.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think I totally I don't think it sounds, that sounds amazing to do something like that every day. And I think that's often, the consistency with the mental side of things is often something that's like the first thing that goes, so to speak. But Stu, I'm curious, is there like a minimum, I don't even know how to say this, but like a minimum dose of mental training that's a minimum effective dose, so to speak, for mental training, if people want to get
Um,
started?
well, for mental training is one thing, and then for mindfulness training is like potentially two different topics. But
Okay, if you don't mind like differentiating for us, that would be helpful too.
so the way, so like a typical scenario is that I'm meeting with my clients like once a week, anywhere from a half hour to an hour. And it's, it's really, it's like a review. It's let's add a little something. Let's tweak like some skill development that we've talked about. Let's make sure that we're focused on the right things. It's like, it's this nonstop like redirection back onto the right path. But the cool part is that once you're doing that, you can kind of like self-correct. Like at first it takes maybe a lot of coach correction, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, like I get it, and I still need that nudge to get back on track. But then I created the app, and where I believe that mindfulness training is so important, or the daily doses are so important, is because it connects the individual sessions, right? So like 1 hour a week isn't that much unless you're connecting it with these messages that you're kind of listening to and working on in between. And those are 10 minutes, like, so it's not, and it can be 5 minutes. I mean, research is really more clear that it's really at 10 minutes is where like we really want to get to. And then, if we can get to 20 or 30, awesome. But like 10 minutes is that dose. But man, if you say at first, like, I'm going to try, like for anybody that's not done it, try 5 minutes and you'll be like, holy crap, like 5 minutes is a long time to try to not be distracted in the mind. It's crazy. Like 15 seconds is a long time. So yeah, that's the way I would define them a little bit differently. But they work together, is the beauty, I think.
Yeah, no, that's good to understand conceptually. I just have one more topic I want to talk about before I'll have you guys leave everyone with maybe like a thought or a piece of advice at the end. But before we do, I just want to talk quickly about self-talk, because I think, as we know, that's going on all the time, whether we're paying attention to it or not. And I have been known over the years, I had some horrible things I would say to myself. Like when I think back in college, I'm like, even some of the stuff I'd say under my breath out loud, like it's horrifying. So Stu, if you don't mind just starting us off with talking for a minute about the importance of self-talk. And then Andi, if you're able to share, like, I'm curious to hear, if you're open to it, like your worst and your best, like what is your self-talk like? What's it been like over the years? Maybe it's a strength of yours and it's always good. But kind of like how I guess my question for you, Andi, given Stu's kind of explanation for everyone a little bit more about the importance of self-talk, then to hear from you, Andi, on like, say it's not going well in a given day, how can you right the ship? Like, what do you do to, you realize like midway through training, I gotta like fix this. So Stu, I'll let you start with just kind of giving a little bit of context to it.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, self-talk's there, period. Like it's there. We have between estimated about 25,000 to 50,000 thoughts per day. So we're nonstop. If we're awake, this thing's running, and it's creating like the narrative of our life. And it really is the voice that tells us like what we're really able to do. Like it kind of sets the boundary line, right? And so if it's particularly negative, it's going to set a really low bar. And it's going to keep telling you, man, like you did this wrong. See, this is why you don't deserve this. And the thing is it's that voice is a protective voice, which is designed to keep us alive. So it's got like this purpose, right? So like that's dangerous. So don't do that again. But it crushes us if we're not aware of it. Like, or it can crush us, I should say. And some people I think do kind of naturally go through life kind of happy-go-lucky, but like not a lot of us, and not a lot of us that are in really high pressure, high performance settings don't, because so much of the outside language is always around what you did wrong, not necessarily what we did right. So we kind of internalize that conversation. And so anyways, bottom line is that's the way it's set. And so much of what we should do, like, you know, from a recommendation standpoint, and Andy can certainly talk about this more, is like decide like, well, you know, how do you talk to a child? How do you talk to your best friend? How do you talk to people that you love when you hear them be like overly self-critical? And then how do you speak to yourself? And it's, and you know, and I usually do something where I'll say like, why don't you talk that way to your best friend? Why don't you talk that way to your spouse? Why don't you talk that way to a child? And they're always like, well, it's wrong, it's hurtful, it's useless, it's not effective. And they're like, well, then why do you speak like that to yourself? Like, it doesn't make any sense. But you have to like shine that bright light on it to make it come out and make sense. Because if you don't, it's just there. It's just kind of like, that's what I do, so I'm going to keep doing it. And so a weird technique, but a good technique, is to actually say your name. Now, not out loud, but inside your head, where you're like, Stu, like, yeah, you lost the ball. You're all right. Win it back. But if you just say win it back or something like that, but you don't like kind of personalize it as if you're giving advice to another person, sometimes it's not quite as powerful. So anyways, that's on my end. But Andy, you go and talk real life stuff.
If you're Lori Lindsay, you do say it out loud to yourself, though.
Hey, some people do, right? Some people do.
I do.
I don't recommend that.
I like, I'll use my first name and my middle name. Like, what are you doing? You know, just like, Andy, gosh. But yeah, when you first mentioned this, I thought of one of my favorite videos is, I think you're practicing something for Techne and you mess it up and you just like wind up and crank the ball.
I know exactly what one you're talking about.
I love that video because it cracks me up every time because it's so relatable, where you're like, you know, you're working, you mess something up, you're just so frustrated. So I don't know, that's what that made me think of. I think I could say a lot of things that I have said to myself that are not great. And I think Stu puts it in a really good way. It's like, you would never say that to anybody else. And lots of swear words, lots of not good things. And I think it's funny. I think as when you're young, you're taught to self-critique. And I think that gets misconstrued with being super like negative and harsh on yourself. Like, there's a difference between evaluating your performance and like just putting yourself down. And I think that when I was younger, I was like, oh, this is really good for me because it makes me better. And I think it did motivate me to practice and fix things, but it was too murky with a lot of the negative and a lot of just my confidence in general. And that's not what you want. So, yeah. And I think I've also realized that it's okay you can't necessarily control your thoughts. I don't know if I'm going to say this right. So I think that like, it's okay to say something bad to yourself, but then you have to be like, cut it off. I'm not going to think that. But I think I've had a lot of going through an injury where you're out for a long time, a lot of questioning yourself, and, you know, being cut from teams and thinking like, am I good enough? Will I ever be good enough? That type of thought is not good. So I've had a lot of those. And I think and I probably will have more, and that's okay. Things I do mid-practice, mid-game that really help me is I have like a trigger word that I say to myself that has a lot of meaning to me. So I think that's been something I've recommended to people, is like, think about why you love soccer, or like, think about, like, for me, I'll just say my trigger word is sharp. So for me, that means a lot of different things. It means like being tuned in mentally. It means my touch being clean. It means being like aware of the game and quick. And so it has this like physical meanings and soccer meanings and mental meanings to me. So like, I say that to myself, okay, like sharp, sharp, sharp. And then the thing that I've been it's always like next play, you mess up the next play, next play, next play. And I do that too with my teammates. It's like, if we miss a shot, it's like, all right, next one's going in. Like, we're one step closer. But that's my strategy for when things I feel like I'm not doing well, is I just start over communicating, because I think it helps me forget my mistakes and like focus on the now. So I, even if it's just information to a teammate, like left shoulder, right shoulder, or if it's like pumping them up because they did something great, I think it helps me ditch myself as an individual and things that I've done. And it helps me just get back into the present of the game. So that's always like my strategy. And especially as someone who's supposed to be an organizer, I think that it really helps. So that those are like kind of my game practice strategies.
You know, the phrase is get out of you and into them. Like, it's so good to, like, when you're in that space, to get out of here. It's so weird that the chatter, the noise that's in here, once verbalized, either literally, like, so in a session when a player just shares like what's going on, they're like, it's like so relieving just to kind of get it out, because in here it's like, yeah, I do suck and I am horrible and I never, and then all of a sudden we say it and we're like, what am I saying? Like, this is like, it's so foolish, but it's like, until it comes out, it's like heard differently. And then on the field, that ability to get out of you is important. Like, because we can get really sucked in and drawn into ourselves when we're maybe not playing that perfect game. And the more that we can get like out, like get loud and get out and start, like I talk about directive communication and supportive. And Andi hit on both, right? Like, so left shoulder, right shoulder is directive, but supportive is like next one, or we're going to get this, or you're all right, you know, and like so there are two different types, but no matter what, it's like, I'm going to feed into them now. I'm going to pour into them, which gets you out of you in that moment and it's really what you have to do, because we can get too withdrawn. And normally if you see somebody get quiet on the field, like, that's not a good sign. Like, get them moving, get them talking as a teammate, because typically if they're quiet, that means they're sucked in.
Yeah. And I think the danger as a player, and I know this for myself, is that you feel like if you're making mistakes, you're not in a place to tell anyone else something. So I think that's a really important, like, to break that cycle, because it's so easy to just withdraw from the game vocally and not showing for the ball and doing all that. So to purposely go the other direction is really, really great. Last thing for both of you, if you could, so the next Andi Sullivan is listening to this, saying, I want to be where she is now. What is one piece of advice? It could be about mental skills training or just anything, but like, what's the one thing you would leave a young aspiring player with?
Oh gosh.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Stu, if you want to go first, if you have something for someone.
Stu, go first while I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be outrageously cliche. Plus, I'm going to break your rule because I'm not going to do one. I'm going to kind of do two, but I consider them close together. One is like, please have fun. I don't care if you're a pro. Please have fun. Like, at the end of the day, if we're not having fun, what are we doing? Like especially if you're a youth player. So, like, figure out what makes you enjoy like the game and like dig into that. And then, like, what I would say is closely connected to that is become curious. Like, you know, yeah, I think of you and the app, like the Techne app, is about curiosity. Like, it's about like, well, what can I learn? How can I do this? And that's like a curious questioning process, rather than I'm not good enough, so I need to download this app. Does that make sense? Like, so find curiosity in what you're doing, because curiosity is like where learning and growth happen, as opposed to like, well, I'm not good enough, so I must do this thing so that I can become better. So those would be, like, from a youth perspective, like, those are the places I would want them to go. No, I think everything else you'll either become Andi or you won't, but it won't be because you've beat yourself up at that point.
Yeah.
Or you're focused on the wrong stuff, at least.
Oh, that's great. Did that give you time to think, Andi?
Yeah. And I feel like you kind of hit him on the head, because I like agree with both of those. And like, start now would be my advice with those things, because I think at the beginning of the conversation, Stu was saying like, oh, this is the last frontier that you haven't tapped. And I like, what if I had tapped it sooner? Like not, but I don't know the answer to that, but how strong, he was talking about, you know, kids are still developing. So how strong would those skills be if they started, you know, experimenting with them now? And when I look back, it's hard to say like, oh, would I change something, because I am where I am now. And I, you know, I'm very grateful for the life that I've lived so far. And so I don't want to change anything, because I am happy with where I am now. Was that even a sentence? I don't think so. But I do think that I put a lot of additional stress on myself that was unnecessary, and I could have enjoyed myself a lot more. So it is fun. And I honestly, I have a teammate, you know, we used to say this to each other at Stanford when things were like difficult. We would look around and say like, remember, this is fun. Like, this is supposed to be fun. And I said that the other day to one of my spirit teammates who went to Stanford, is like, when things getting crazy, it's like, remember, this is fun. And it's kind of a joke, but I agree. And when Stu was talking about Techne, about curiosity, it's not what can I learn, but how can I make this my own? And I think that's what I want to say. So, okay, sorry, I'm excited. When I was younger and I was adding all those additional stressors on myself, I would look around at other people and say like, oh, I wish I were so-and-so, or, oh, I wish I were so-and-so. And looking back, like, that's what I would tell myself, is like, never wish you were anybody else, because like no matter who you are, like, you are special, like, you are awesome. You have skills that no one else has. You can grow in skills that you want to have. Because I think I spent a lot of time like being envious and putting myself down, and rather than developing curiosity in myself. So that is what I would tell a younger player, is like, learn by yourself, develop that curiosity for the game and for yourself. And yeah, don't like be you. Sounds so cheesy, we're talking about cliches, but be you, and like, don't want to be anyone else. And you were saying like, oh, the next Andi Sullivan is like, I don't want there to be another me, I want there to be whoever you are. Is that so lame?
No,
it's awesome. And you know, here's
I'm gonna get out there and train now.
This is like the cool part of this though, because it's so those last two pieces are so rooted in deep like science of psychology. So one, comparison is the thief of joy, right? Like, no, don't compare, right? Like it's useless. Like, everything that you don't have that somebody else, you know, maybe does have but you have then what you have that they don't have. Like, so it's robbing you of the joy of what you are and what you do and how you play. And then the second part is that idea of gratitude. And these things are like deeply, like, these are some foundational pieces of happiness and fulfillment. And like, so and non-compare, like, don't compare, because that rips us from happiness and fulfillment. And vice versa, you know, being grateful, like you said, like, yeah, like, I don't know, I didn't do things perfectly, but like, I'm grateful to be where I am today. And I'm going to remind myself, because when we're grateful, we can't be unhappy. Like, you can't practice this moment where like, I'm so thankful and be unhappy, right? Like, that, you can't do that. So the practice of it is really like foundationally strong. So that was cool stuff.
Yeah, no,
I knew I liked working with her.
No,
Sorry, it took me a while to get there. I hope you edit this to make me sound a little more.
I'll edit. There's a lot I can pull from this. I so appreciate the conversation. Every time I talk about this stuff, I'm like, damn, I wish I could go back, because I mean, I think we're very similar in a lot of ways, Andi. And when I look at like what I could have done over the years on the mental side, I was a freaking disaster. I mean, I realize more and more, like, I think I thought it wasn't a strength of mine until recently. And now, even when just after this conversation, I'm like, it was a really big detriment in my career.
Can I just throw into you guys, like, this is what I do every day, right? So I have these conversations with amazing people that accomplished a lot, are still accomplishing a lot, coaches that accomplish a lot and now are in the coaching ranks and accomplishing a lot. And almost everybody says exactly what you're saying, which is like, damn, I needed this then, and I wish I would have partaken in it when I had the opportunity. I mean, I cannot tell you how often that's the exact conversation I hear all the time. And then the thing that bums me out to a certain level is how little resources and time that we actually give to young people to do it. And so we're like, all the adults, and Andy, I'm calling you an adult, by the way, is like, we're all saying the same thing. Like, damn, like we should have done this earlier. It would have made a big deal. Yet, and in fairness, a lot of 16-year-olds don't want to hear about it. So like your 16-year-old self may have needed it and yet wouldn't have accepted it potentially. But the point is like, we should be doing it younger and earlier. There's just no two ways about it. It would be so proactive.
And not just in the performance side, like it has so many other benefits, just like with health and learning. It helps you like retain information better, which is something that I feel like I've gotten a little poor at since leaving school, and something I want to get back to. So like, yes, it's also for the performance, but we've talked about this too, Stu, is like in your relationships, just everything, like it, it's not just about the performance. And that's also something that we've talked about is, you're a whole human being. And see, like also this conversation is sparking so many questions in my head since like the first thing that Stu said, I wanted to ask more things, but yeah, I think it would be cool to explore, using it more in sports and in school at a younger age.
Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes a mental model, right? It becomes like we can use this model that we create for performance on the field in everything that we can just kind of funnel everything through it. And it may not give us the answer, or it may not totally regulate what we need to regulate, but it's like, okay, I kind of know what to do when I'm in this mode. And it doesn't need to be on the field. It can be in life. So yeah. So good.
Yep. I have this could go on. I think I could talk about this stuff for like 2 more hours, but I'm going to take this recording and I'll like edit it up and stuff. And is there anything that either of you said? I didn't think anything was like off limits, but is there anything you prefer me not to use for any reason? Okay. Cool. I'll run stuff by you guys. I'll like we'll use it on Techne social media. We have a new mental training thing going in the app about self-talk. So that's why I wanted to ask about that. So we'll make sure we use the good parts. I so appreciate you guys. Andy, I'm always watching. I have like a few teams in the league I love watching, and then a few I like want to lose every game. I can't share the ones, but you guys are on my list.
She better edit this part right now.
I'm still recording. I gotta stop.